today's agenda for Lunch and Learn number 3 is, obviously Stacey is going to guide us through that. We are really going to concentrate today on accounts payable and AR. There's an outline below here. We're going to cover, vendors, transactions, approvals, document recognition, expense management. We're, going to then switch over to AR, where we can talk about, the customers. I think one of the real big differences, just to speak about, is that in Great Plains, the AR invoicing module is just really just a header level, where you can just say, put a document in for $150 and there's really no details. In Acumatica, the accounts receivable invoicing, transaction module is very much expanded. It allows you to put line items in and print an invoice out that has a lot more detail in it. So a very different approach. We're also going to talk a little bit about write-offs and statements and unapply, reapplies. We'll also talk a little bit about the different document status processing versus GP. And we'll also close out then with AR agings and talk a little bit about, how that varies, versus, the GP aging. So that being said, again, the agenda today is a little bit longer. So, we needed more time for these two subjects. So it will go to 2 o'clock. We talked about digital transformation in the other 2 sessions. We talked about the additions, the core platform. We just actually were talking about that, being that, the import-export scenarios are like built right into it. Much more powerful base of code that allows us to do things that a normal ERP system can't do. Very flexible in terms of modifications, customization. Talked about the number of customers, talked about cloud to cloud, just to go back to that. When you're in a cloud and talking to another cloud, offering, it's going to be much more seamless. Data security, really heavy on everybody's mind these days. Once you go to the cloud, it takes a little bit of the burden off of you because, basically Amazon and Acumatica are, kind of creating that security blanket. So you don't have to worry about firewalls and upgrading your servers, all that kind of goes away. And there's typically a lot of expense with that sometimes, as well as risk of the business. We talked about the fact that Acumatica is run in the Amazon cloud, Amazon Web Services. But you can certainly run it in a private cloud if that's what you want, or on premise. There's a lot of options. We talked a little bit about in the previous sessions, the modder-friendly growth licensing. Acumatica kind of takes a different approach, doesn't necessarily do it by user, at least on the what we call the advanced edition. It's more a resource level that you get, and then they don't care how many users can use that resource level. That resource level will support a finite number of users, but you're not getting nickel-dimed on each one. The small business edition, again, just to qualify that, that is one that comes in 2 versions, a 5-user and a 10-user. We can get into details if people want to know about that, offline. Data ownership. A lot of people feel that when they go to the cloud, they lose their ownership of their data, or the ability to access it maybe the way they might want to do it if they had it on a server. With Acumatica, that's not the case. Most of the other cloud services, NetSuite, Intact, I mean, once you go to the cloud, you can download your files but you really don't have true access to it. You can't get to it. Acumatica, again, we talked about the snapshot. You take a snapshot of your data, you load it to a version locally or on a server, and you can restore your complete system, including your setup, in a local environment, and have access to the SQL database behind the scenes. We talked about Acumatica University as free training for unlimited people, even training for people that even don't own Acumatica. So The responsive design, we've talked a lot about that a lot in the first session, user interface, and a little bit in the second, but Acumatica is one of the few, if not, again, I happened to look at another system yesterday, that Microsoft, the 365 Business Central. It's not, responsive design. You can see the screens in a mobile format, but it's a different format. Acumatica screens can be shrunk down to a phone size, and they function just fine on a phone. Again, just different technology. And I have a feeling that most of the other cloud services out there, work the same way as 365 BC, which we don't really feel comfortable with these days. To be honest with you, we don't represent it. So, and again, when you look at those varied platforms, I mean, you can get down even to a watch size, and then being able to communicate with your software via Alexa or a Siri's, interface. Again, just proves out the difference of the platform. So, we kind of gone through this slide quite a few times. So, just take a look at it here. We got, latest cloud technology, anywhere, limited users based on a resource level, power of choice to run it where you want, complete tight integration with Microsoft Exchange, Power BI, flexibility of the dashboards, really built within the product, being able to, kind of visually connect with your data. We just talked about your data and ownership. So really important. And again, when we come back to the purpose of this, Acumatica versus GP, much more modern product. Great Plains is about 30 years old. Acumatica is 10 years old. True web browser, versus being able to connect to, your application terminal server or remote desktop. A true API, application programmer interface. Great Plains has, eConnect, but that's not an API. It's just a proprietary way you can try to bring stuff in. And then you can also, use that integration manager tool, which is a separate tool set outside of the product. Doesn't really, was actually bought by from another company. So the API is much easier to interface. The financial report writer, we covered that in the second session, Lunch and Learn. Report writer looks and feels just like FRX/management reporter, but much more powerful and built right into the core of the application and runs very quickly. No needs for building what they call a data mart, which is a which is a subset of your data, and then having to refresh that data mart. Acumatica takes away all that. Document management, they call artificial intelligence and machine learning, built into the platform. Just makes for a better user experience. Document universal search, we talked about that. You can't do any kind of searching of your underlying database in GP, but in Acumatica you can. Workflow engines and automation agents that can be kicked off behind the scenes, and then the built-in dashboards, pivot tables, right into the core solution without having to go out to an Excel to do a pivot table or something like that. We have a conversion tool that we can point at your GP databases and convert a lot of your master files without having to do them, one by one. We've used it now on actually our very first GP to Acumatica conversion, which actually just took place a couple of days ago. And we will continue to build that tool out to make it more cost effective for us to be able to move you from GP to Acumatica. And we already talked about the fact that Cal switched 4 years ago, and I truly feel, as the business owner and working with the product on a daily basis, that it's the best thing we could have done, and we have seen nothing but advantages moving to the Acumatica platform over GP. Not that GP was bad, but there's just so many more things that you can do. So all right, let's see Acumatica in action. I'm gonna send it over to Stacey.
All right, so we have a lot to cover today. I'm really excited to show you some of the key differences both in the AP and the AR module today. We have about an hour and 45 minutes or so to kind of take a deep dive within these two modules. While that is a lot of time, right, the modules have a lot of functionality, so we won't be able to cover everything. So again, what I'm going to focus on today is trying to point out kind of some of the key differences, either how Acumatica functions differently than GP, or just additional functionality that's going to allow your users to be able to kind of streamline their processes in your business and just be much more efficient here within the platform. So I'm going to start on the payables side of the house, and I'm going to go and navigate over to our vendors. So I want to start by kind of talking about some of the differences with the information that we're able to store at a vendor level, and then what does that mean as we're transacting throughout the system. So here we're in our vendors generic inquiry. For anyone that is new to our Lunch and Learn series that we've been hosting, a generic inquiry is kind of equivalent to a smart list, but I'll say a smart list on steroids. So here we're looking at a list of all of our vendors that we currently have set up here in the Acumatica system. Now I'm going to utilize the side panel functionality that we looked at in our last session, and I'm going to kind of demonstrate that right here from this vendor inquiry, I can pop open my vendor profile without even having to drill into a vendor record. And this is called a side panel. So I just popped open a side panel of the vendor profile where I'm able to go ahead in my list, in my generic inquiry list, right? And I can click on any of these vendors, and you'll notice that my vendor profile is dynamically updating to the vendor that is selected. Okay. Also within the side panel, I just want to show that we actually added a second one that again is showing us vendor information for the vendor that's selected. But in this case, it's showing me all of the open documents for that vendor. If I click on show all, I can easily have visibility, right, to all of my vendor documents that are in the system right from this same list without having to navigate out. So just keep in mind, we can build out an unlimited number of side panels, which again are going to be additional screens in Acumatica where we can pass that vendor ID into to show you whatever information you want to see without having to leave this single screen here. I'm going to go back up to my vendor where we're going to spend a little bit of time just talking about, again, some of the additional information which ends up equating to additional functionality as we go through some of the different features here in the module. First thing I want to point out to you is in Acumatica, we talked about how you could actually take multiple companies or multiple locations within a company, and you can bring them all into this, this single Acumatica tenant or instance. Like, it's not like GP where you actually have to set up separate databases, which means separate chart of accounts, separate vendors, separate customers, and so on, right? We're able to bring all of those companies or locations under kind of like a single umbrella here, where if you want to be able to share all of those records, you can. Now, what I want to show you here is how easy it is to be able to restrict visibility of a particular vendor. If you don't want all of these companies or branches that are under that single Acumatica umbrella, if you don't want all those companies or branches to have visibility to them, you could easily restrict them right here through this visibility setting, right? So if I was to go and say, I only want this vendor visible for my wholesale branch, what that means is anybody else that is transacting or has one of these branches or companies set as their default, if they're transacting in the payables or purchasing module, they will not see this vendor. It's going to filter that out and not allow them to transact on that. So again, this is an optional feature if you want to be able to restrict vendors to certain companies or branches, but wanted to point out how simple it is to kind of restrict that visibility. For every vendor customer, any kind of master record, even transactions in the system, Acumatica does allow you to be able to store a note for that particular record. Now, your notes are up here in your header. You see this little piece of paper. When I click on that, that opens up the ability for me to put in a note that's specific to this vendor. Now, in this notes pop-up, there's actually two different types of notes that we can store. Just a general record note that would be visible to any user that had access to the vendor profile. They could open up that note and they could see whatever was recorded here. Okay. We also have the ability to add what's called a pop-up note. So this is something that, again, GP doesn't have, where I can put special instructions in this pop-up note. And as I transact on this particular vendor, whenever I call up the vendor in a transaction, this pop-up note is going to appear before I'm able to start keying in any information. So I'm going to stick a pop-up note in here that says, call for pricing before placing an order. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say, okay. Okay. One thing you'll notice is the color of that paper changed. So whenever there's a note stored within that records note file, the color changes from a white to a yellow as a visual indicator that there's a note there. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I'm going to navigate, I'm going to keep that open, but I'm going to open up my bills and adjustment screen in another window to show you how the system's going to behave now with that pop-up note added. So again, my vendor is AA Services. So if I was to come into my bills and adjustments and I type in AA Services, you'll notice this little pop-up note that comes up for every user with those special instructions. Okay. So again, the same functionality is on the customer side. I won't go into this level of detail when we look at customers, but just note pop-up notes are available as well on the customer side, so that as you're transacting on that customer throughout the entire system, it could be in the sales module, it could be in the AR module, it could be in field service module. It doesn't matter where. If you have that pop-up note stored on that record, anytime you transact, that note will pop up for the customer to see what that note is. Okay. All right, I'm going to close this and go back to my vendors. And I just want to give you a flavor of the file attachment functionality here in Acumatica. What I'm going to demonstrate to you here is the same, regardless of whether this is a vendor, a customer, or transaction. Any place where you see this little paper clip and you can attach a file, and I can tell you it's probably at 99.9% of the screens here in Acumatica, you're allowed to attach files. So wherever you see that paper clip, there is a really cool drag and drop method for attaching files. So I have my File Explorer over here opened on another screen. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the file, one of the files that's in my File Explorer, and I'm just going to literally drag and drop that. So you could do this from an email. Maybe you got a 1099, W-9 form back from one of your vendors, and you want to go ahead and attach that. Right from your email where you have that attachment, you can just take that and you can drag and drop. Like the notes field, the file attachment works kind of the same way, where that paperclip icon, it actually changes slightly to a paperclip with a sheet of paper, but you have that yellow, which really catches the user's attention to just show you that you do have some sort of file attachment there. If I click on it, okay, here's where I can just see the attachment that I dragged and dropped. So along with the drag and drop method for attaching files, you certainly could browse out to somewhere on your local computer, on your network, wherever the file is stored, and you could browse out and you could also attach a file through that method. Okay. We haven't touched on activities too much. Activities is a way for you to record communication that's taking place with either a particular customer or vendor record, or even activities at a transactional level. There's a few different forms of activities that our clients are typically using on a daily basis. The first one being a task. right? So if you have a to-do that you need to do for this vendor, maybe you sent them a W-9 and you need to follow up with them in a week to make sure that you receive that. You could add a task by clicking on the task button, and you can create that to-do with a reminder for yourself. So confirm receipt of W-9. Okay, and I want to give my vendor, let's say, a week to get back to me. So I'm going to set that for the 12th, and I can take it a step further, and I can tell Acumatica if I want to actually give me a reminder. Now, a reminder is kind of like a Outlook pop-up. If you got a meeting or something scheduled, right, you get that little meeting reminder that pops up where you can snooze it, or you can mark it complete, or, you know, take some action on it. This reminder window kind of works the same exact way if you turn on reminders. If you're not using reminders, then this task that I just created, again, that's going to be associated with the record that I created the task on, I'm going to be able to find that task in my task list. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep this the way it is and hit save and close. You'll notice that that task gets recorded here as an activity on the vendor. So I have record of that in the future. And then if I go out to my task list, again, if I don't want to use reminders in the system to remind me, typically people are coming into Acumatica when they're using tasks to manage their to-dos on a daily basis, and they're keeping an eye on their task list. This is a list of all my open tasks. We could use our filters to look at things maybe that are today or within a date range. So again, we can kind of manage those based on when they are due. So that's a task activity. You also have different forms of notes. So these are just some kind of groupings of notes that classify them. This list is customizable. We could get rid of note classifications you're not going to use or add custom ones. But again, it's just going to allow you to just add a note indicating, you know, that you took some sort of action or there was some sort of activity, right, with this vendor. So here I could just record a note saying, you know, sent W-9 to vendor, not for vendor, to vendor. Okay, so you have your summary description down here in the body. You have some unlimited amount of space, right, that you can make use of to record a nice lengthy note if you need to about your conversation or what took place with this vendor. So again, if I go ahead and save that, here it is, another activity that got inserted, but you'll notice the type, which is kind of organizing the different types of activities, again, notes, tasks, emails that we're recording here. Okay. The last activity type that we typically see people using are emails. So if I wanted to email some communication out to my vendor here, I could certainly come here. I can initiate an email. Maybe this would be the email where I'm sending them that W-9 where, you know, please complete W-9. I can put whatever I want to here in the body of the email. If I have my signature set up in my user profile, you would have your signature auto-populate here. And then I could even go ahead up to my files and I can browse out to where maybe my, you know, blanket W-9 is. And I can pull that in, attach it, and then I can go ahead and I can send that off to my vendor where, again, we have record of that email. You could click into any of these activities where you could see who sent it, where did it go, again, and what was the body of it, and if there were any attachments. On the customer side, even on the vendor side, if you're doing POs typically, right, you'd be emailing documents to your vendors, but on the customer side, you're probably emailing your invoices. Anytime there's that email activity at a transactional level, you're going to see that communication and that record of those emails getting stored here under either the vendor or the customer. So again, you could, you know, if a customer calls and says, hey, I didn't get invoice 123, you can go to your activities, you can find the email that relates to that, and then you can indicate to them when it was sent and who it was sent to. So that's a little bit of activities. Again, GP doesn't have anything even close to like this, that's going to allow you to enter and track and store all of your different types of communications that you're having, again, with any of your master records or even at a transactional level. Okay. I'm going to just hit my little plus button. I do want to, I'll come over here. Why is my vendor ID not popping up here? There we go. I'm going to hit my little plus button to add a new vendor. There are some different statuses of vendors. I just wanted to point out to you in a new one here. Acumatica has what's called a one-time vendor, which is pretty cool. Maybe, you know, someone went out and, you know, got lunch. You needed to write a check to that vendor, and you are never going to do business with them again. You can set them up as a one-time vendor, and as soon as the AP bill that's entered is paid, the system will automatically set this vendor status for this one-time vendor to inactive, so that you as a user don't have to worry about going and changing the status on a one-time or a temporary vendor to inactive. The system will do that for you automatically if you say that you're going to just use them one time. This functionality also exists on the customer side. If you set a customer up as a one-time customer, once the invoice is paid for that customer, the system will automatically make them inactive.
Hey Stacey, I wanted to join in here to share. One of the other interesting things about Acumatica is that, you know, when you're setting up for security, you set your employees up, you know, so that they can have access to the system. Interesting enough, Acumatica goes ahead, and when you set up your employees, it automatically sets them up as vendors. So you know, like if you have to pay out expenses, most systems require you to go and set up, you know, a vendor for, you know, your employee to write them an expense check. Acumatica treats employees, you know, as a master record in a sense, knowing that, hey, I've got an employee, I might transact with them either, you know, as a vendor, or maybe even in some cases as a customer, but it automatically sets up a business account because it assumes an employee is somebody you're going to be doing business with. So I just thought I'd share that. Something that was really interesting to me, to know that you know, they designed the system with that insight.
Yep. Thanks, George. And I'm going to show you how to enter expense receipt in a little bit, which we'll demonstrate how the employee that we're recording that expense receipt on was not set up in your vendor list. It is an employee, but the system is taking that expense receipt that was paid for by the employee's, you know, personal credit card or whatever, and it's going to create an AP bill for them automatically. So we'll go through that example. Okay. One last thing here under my payment settings. If I go ahead and change my payment method that I want to use for this vendor to a FedWire or FedWire balance, the system's smart enough to know to open up the, you know, the vendor's banking information, where I would insert their account number, their account name, routing number, and the bank that they bank with. So there's not a separate screen that we're kind of having to navigate to, like GP, where we're setting up kind of that ACH wire information. It's all controlled through the payment method that's associated with the vendor. Opens up those fields that we need to pay them via ACH. Okay. All right. So let's go over now and talk a little bit about the bills and adjustment screen. So the bills and adjustment screen, which again, I'm at an inquiry for it. So this is showing me all my bills in the system. I have a filter created where it's only showing me ones that are open, meaning they're not paid, okay? And then if I hit the plus button, it's gonna bring me back directly into my bills and adjustment transactions screen. So I'm gonna quickly just take you through a bill, putting one in manually, and then we'll go through a couple different scenarios as to how we can get bills into the system outside of doing it manually. So I'm just going to pick my go-to vendor here, pop in their name. I use the lookup to find the vendor, but you could certainly key in the vendor name, or if you know their ID, either one will work right in the field here. Again, if I just typed in the name vendor, I should see my AA vendor pop up. Okay. We have locations on the vendor side of things. Typically, most people only have one vendor location associated with the vendor. If you are using multi-branch, multi-company functionality, and you're not using like a centralized AP processing where your branches may be paying all their own bills, processing all their own bills, that's probably one of the few examples and uses where I've seen someone have to actually set up additional locations. And that's because we want to be able to store at those kind of branch locations the branch's banking information that this bill is going to get paid out of. So again, we'll keep the main location. By setting that to main under my financial details, it's pulling in the default AP account. It's pulling in my payment information as far as how I pay this vendor. So you can see here we're paying it by check and out of this account here. So all of that's rolling in based off of, again, that location over there, as well as tax details. If I was charging any sort of use or purchase tax, that's at a location level as well. The payment terms rolling in from the vendor based on the payment term that works in conjunction with our invoice date to then go ahead and set the due date and the cash discount date if this is a term that allows for a cash discount. My vendor reference number, I'm just going to pop in my vendor's invoice number. Okay. And then we have our description field where we can go ahead and put a summary description into this field if we choose to do so. So here's where I think it actually gets quite a bit different than what you're seeing in GP today. And that is at an AP bill level, you're able to enter document details at a line level. So let's say you have an invoice in front of you where, you know, you bought 5 different things and it's not inventory related in any way. And you want to break up those purchases, right, into different lines here to indicate what you bought. You can go ahead and do that here in your AP bill. So let's say I was buying some office supplies. I could put here and say, hey, I bought some pencils. I could put a quantity, a unit measure, unit cost, extended cost if I want to record that level of detail, or I could just come in and put in a flat amount and say it cost me $20. The default GL account that you see populating here is coming from the expense account on the vendor. If I wanted to change that, I certainly could. So I could look up maybe my office expense GL account and override that. I'm going to add another line and where maybe I'll say, you know, case of paper. Here I'll demonstrate, I could actually say I bought 5, and then I could have my different unit of measures where I could say maybe 5 boxes, where each box was $25, and then it will go ahead and it will calculate that extended cost.
Stacey, I just wanted to also mention that just like the generic inquiries with the columns, all of these columns are completely customizable, correct, Stacey? We can drag these columns wherever you want them, yes. And we can also remove any columns that you want if you want to make the screen a little more simplistic. And when you're making these changes to the screen layouts, whether it be the order or which fields are being shown, you're basically changing the view for yourself. You're not affecting anybody else's view. And you can actually save those views so that when you open it up tomorrow, it will look the way it, whatever adjustments you made. So just wanted to let you know that these grids can be moved just by dragging and dropping, or the column configurator can literally, drop down and add new columns that might not be present if they're available, or take away these to make the screen much more simplistic.
And I actually did customize this ahead of time. I took out a lot of fields that weren't really pertinent to what we were showing today. I had some project accounting fields in there, so I kind of cleaned that up through this column configurator, and I move them over to the available columns versus the selected columns so they wouldn't display. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save this. So again, different than GP, where GP you're kind of putting in when at an AP bill, you're just putting in like a total dollar amount. Yes, you can break down your distributions to multiple accounts, but you don't have the ability to actually provide the level of detail that we're seeing here on this screen unless you're, using the AP transaction screen where you're tying, right, your bill to a purchase order. Then GP lets you get down to a line level. So I really like this functionality here that we're seeing. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove my hold. Okay, now we do have approvals set up here, okay, where we kept it really simple. We just said any AP bill has to go through an approval, and it's going to require a user who belongs to this AP work group to be able to go ahead and approve it. So for the sake of just making this easy, my user that I'm logged into is part of this AP work group, so I can go over here and I actually can approve this bill. We can send out any sort of email notification when a bill gets submitted to the approver to let them know that they need to approve. We could have hyperlinks in those emails that bring them directly to the transaction that they need to approve. There is also an approval screen. Here's, let me just go to my task approvals. And here's where in here you can actually go. I'm going to go to my work group approvals. And here's where you can see your approvals that are waiting for approval there, or your transactions waiting for approval. All right, so I'm going to come over here and I'm going to approve. I could reject if I want. Okay, I can set the system up so that in order to approve or reject, I have to kind of put in a note. We don't have it configured that way, but if you want someone to be able to record a note, just kind of acknowledging their approval through that note, or in the rejection, they can indicate maybe why they're rejecting it. We can certainly do that, and that would get emailed back to the originator of this bill. Okay, so my bill here, it's approved. It's in a balanced state. So balanced state means a couple things. Yes, I could go back and I could make changes to this. However, if I do make changes to it, I will need to kind of have it cycle through that approval again. Okay. Also, a balanced transaction will allow me to release the transaction. Now, the releasing of the transactions, I can do one by one through the release button up here in the header. Okay. Or there is a processing screen where maybe you release all your AP bills that you have entered for the day, perhaps after you go and you run like an edit list report. So before I release, I'm going to kind of come run my AP edit list. This list can be run by the user who created that bill. So if you just wanted to edit a specific user's bills that were entered or your own, you certainly could go and set that created by user. I'm just going to leave this wide open and run this. Okay, and here's where it's showing me all my AP bills that are out there with a balanced status, including the one that I just entered into the system right here on the bottom. Okay. All right, so going back to my bill, what do you want to talk about before I release? There is this pre-release, which is really, I think, a really cool feature here in Acumatica. You could have AP clerks putting in bills. They may not have any idea really which GL account that they should go to. They can put whatever they want there, right? Or maybe they put the account they think that it needs to go to. When they hit pre-release, okay, this is going to put the bill in the system as if it was a bill that needs to be paid. So you'll see this on your aging reports, your open AP, things like that. But it's going to give someone the opportunity to go back, review the bill, do like a reclassification, or just confirm the account that's being used, and they would finalize the releasing of that. Now, when you do a pre-release, instead of hitting the accounts that are specified in the bill, it uses the account for the pre-release that's specified on the vendor card, which we typically put in a class so it rolls here into the card automatically. So anytime someone runs that pre-release function, no matter what the account is on the bill, it's going to go to 81020, which is the reclassification account. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that here, and I'm going to say pre-release. Okay, and then if I go to my financial details tab, here's where you could see it's giving me a drill down into the journal entry for this pre-released batch. So if I go ahead and click that, here's where you're going to see that 81020 account, right, being debited instead of the actual account that was specified in the document. So these dollars are going to sit in this reclassification account for all these bills. Notice the status is pre-released. So this can act as a trigger where we could show on whoever dashboard where they should be monitoring these pre-releases and maybe go take a look at them and release. We can aggregate all these bills and adjustments on their dashboard. We could even send them an email. If someone does a pre-release, we could send an email to someone to notify them that they need to basically go in and review the distributions on this bill, and if they're good, then they can come in and release that. So I'm going to continue working under the assumption I've reviewed the distributions for this particular bill, and I'm going to say release. So usually the people who have access to pre-release may not have access to the release. So going back to my financial details, here is my journal entry number now that's associated with this bill, where you can see it took the dollars out of that reclassification account and it booked it to the two distribution lines on the AP bill. Okay. So the pre-release, right, again, I think it causes or it eliminates the need for a lot of reclassifications at the end of the month as accountants are kind of reviewing things. And by either requiring the pre-release on everything or just leaving that as an option, when someone's not confident in their coding, they can hit the pre-release and that would be notification to someone else that they need to review that and give it their blessing and release it. Okay. So that's kind of entering a bill manually, as well as we covered approvals and the pre-release functionality. Acumatica, like we saw in the journal entry, you can copy a bill, right? So if I find a bill that I've put in the system before and I want to just copy that and create that same thing again, I can hit my clipboard copy and I can paste it and I have a new bill. Okay, I'm going to clear that because I don't want to have to go through all the motions we went to with that first one. Just want to demonstrate that. The next thing is we can have some templates saved. So again, if I have a rent bill that comes in every single month, I can create a template out of it so that I can just paste in my rent template and it's populating my rent vendor and it knows how much, it's got the coding and everything. The only thing I might want to do is double check my invoice date, put in what the new invoice number is. I'm going to remove that from hold. Again, I have approvals on here, so I'm just going to go ahead and approve that, and then I can release. Okay, so that is a great way where you can kind of create those bills there from a template. I'm not going to go through the recurring just for the sake of time. We went through that last week with the journal entry, where you can create a base transaction and create that recurring template so that the system will auto-generate a new AP bill based on whatever frequency is defined in that template there. Okay, I am going to take you through one more bill here where I'm going to do this manually. The difference here is I am going to link this AP bill to a purchase order that has been entered into the system. So in GP, if you have any bills that you need to get into the system and they're related to a purchase order or a purchase receipt, you're actually having to process that bill in a separate transactional screen. Here in Acumatica, you have one bills and adjustment screen that you're using across all your different transaction types, regardless if they're related to POs or receipts or not. So I'm going to hit my plus button. And I'm going to use my vendor Office Max, where I already issued a PO to him or to them for some office supplies. All right. Now to link this bill that I'm putting in to that PO, I can click either the Add PO button or the Add PO line. The Add PO button is going to take all the lines on the PO and it's going to populate my document details with everything that was on the purchase order. The Add PO line is going to allow me to select specific lines on the PO that I might want to bring into this bill. I'm going to just use the Add PO function here. Okay, here's my PO that I have queued up. I'm going to select it, and then I'm just going to add and close. So what it did was it brought all the lines. In this case, it was just one line I put on my PO where I ordered some supplies, a case of paper here. It's pulling that into this bill automatically. You'll notice here that it does provide a link to this PO. So if anyone was ever looking at this bill again in the future and they wanted to know what purchase order this was tied to, it shows you the link. I could come in, I can drill into the link that will bring me directly to that purchase order for review. Okay. From here, the process is the same where I can remove the hold. If there's approvals on it, it goes to that pending approval. If not, it would just go right to the balance state. I'm going to save it before I hit that remove hold and approve. Okay, and now it's balanced where, again, I can release. If I'm done with it, I have my pre-release option, or I could leave it hanging out here, and then I can release all my AP documents under this processing screen that is balanced right through here. Again, I can pick individual ones, or I can just say, oh, release all, and it will go ahead and kind of do that release or that posting, which is the word we use in GP, to the general ledger. Okay, so that's just a flavor of how you would match an AP bill to a PO. Okay, do the same thing with a purchase receipt. All right, I now want to give you a flavor of Acumatica's document recognition functionality that came out earlier this year. So just a little kind of back knowledge on this functionality and what I did to get this transaction to the point where we're going to be viewing it is I worked under the assumption I got an email from one of my suppliers with a bill. And I took that email and I forwarded it to an Acumatica email account that I have set up here. Once I forwarded it, Acumatica actually kind of consumed that email. It saw that it was a PDF, and it now has it queued up in this incoming document screen that I'm going to bring you to, where we're going to be able to go and have the system read through this PDF document and try and populate as much of this AP transaction as it can. Now, if for users that are using this in real life, what I would suggest is that your vendors, instead of emailing maybe your just standard AP inbox or an individual within your organization, you would provide them with the email address that we're using in your Acumatica system so that as they're sending you the bills electronically, Acumatica is just automatically receiving them because they're emailing that account, and they would just be sitting in this incoming document window that I'm going to go to, and it's going to be waiting kind of like a pending processing. Okay, so I have 3 bills that were sent to the Acumatica email account, all right, that are waiting for me to process. Okay, it says it's recognized, but it's not processed yet. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pop open one of these. Now, when I open this, Acumatica automatically starts kind of reading through this PDF file, and it's trying to identify different data elements to be able to populate this transaction. So you can see here, it actually read through, it found the total amount, right, of my invoice. It actually found that there was one line on here, so it inserted it. If there's multiple lines, you'll see it actually breaking that AP bill down into multiple lines here. What it couldn't find was it couldn't read the vendor name, okay? But Acumatica does make this really easy. If you click into the vendor field, you click on the vendor name, it can then go out and try and find that vendor, and it will populate it for you automatically. If it doesn't find it, you could certainly do a quick lookup and assign your vendor or whatever information you're looking to enter here. Okay, so here's my vendor. You'll notice it automatically read my date. When I click on these Acumatica fields that it's going to populate for the AP bill, it's actually showing you where it read that particular data element on that PDF document. So here's my vendor reference number. You can see it's found the invoice number, the amount. It's pulling down here. Okay. So I'm done. The only thing I had to assign was the vendor because it couldn't pull the vendor out of here. As you process these, the system begins to learn how to read these bills for your vendors so that it does a better job kind of automating the document recognition piece every time that you go ahead and you process your PDF documents. So I'm going to hit save and continue. And what this does is it now takes all that information and it populates your bills and adjustment screen for you automatically. Okay. It also goes ahead and let me save this first. I want to show you that it took that PDF document and it automatically attaches it here to the bill for you as well. Okay. And so from here, you would just pick up with the standard AP processing where I can remove my hold. If you have approvals set up, it would run through its approvals and then it's balanced and can be released. So that's pretty cool. And there's some, definitely more sophisticated document recognition systems out there, systems that will, kind of manage all your, and allow you to be paperless right across the organization. But if you're just looking for some simple AP document recognition, this feature is actually, it's pretty cool and it's built in with the core product. One thing that my sample document did not allow for, but the functionality is there, is if you issued a PO and that bill was tied to that PO, you can link it in that previous screen. So it does allow for linking to purchase orders or purchase receipts. Okay, so that's our document recognition piece. Next piece I want to show you is the expense management functionality, where I'm going to go, I'm going to use my mobile app, and I'm going to take a picture of a receipt. And the system's going to use that document recognition functionality, and it's going to populate my receipt for me, where then I can release that receipt in the system, and it will create an AP bill for that particular employee. All right, so I do have things queued up here. I have my screen sharing application running that I'm going to drag over here. Okay, and here's where we're seeing the Acumatica mobile app. If it didn't time out from sitting so long, when I hit my expense receipts, it should bring me right in. Otherwise, I'll have to log in, which I did log in. And you saw how quick that was. It actually had timed out, but it logged me right back in because I am using face recognition. I'm using an iPhone. If you have an Android, you could use kind of the fingerprint thing, but it used face recognition, actually logged me instantly right back into the Acumatica mobile app here. So I'm going to navigate over here to my expense receipts, okay, where I'm going to go and I'm going to take a picture of a receipt here. So I'm going to hit this little camera icon here, which is going to open up my camera, and I can take a picture of a dinner receipt. Now, when the picture snapped on its own, it wasn't quite lined up, so I'm just going to fix that here so it captures an image of the entire receipt, and then I'm going to say done. Okay, so it's uploading, and it's also reading through that and trying to recognize the applicable pieces that it needs to be able to populate my expense receipt. Now, if you wanted to key it in manually, all this information, I could have said skip recognition. But here's where you could see it figured out where I went and I had dinner at the Uncommon Grill, and it used it as my description. It found the date, right, that I had dinner there, and it found the dollar amount. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to hit my little lookup, and I'm going to just say, oh, this was a business dinner and lunch. And depending how we have this configured in Acumatica, it could be configured so that it's using either that employee's company credit card, right? Or we can say we paid with our personal account. So you can toggle it back and forth, and you could set what you want to be the default, a personal account or the corporate credit card. Now, based on the expense item that I selected here, where I said this was a business dinner and lunch, it knows to automatically book this expense receipt to my meals and expense account, so that the user doesn't have to make any sort of accounting decisions as to where this needs to get recorded to. Right? So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to hit save. Okay. And then again, if I have another receipt that I want to kind of queue up, I can hit my camera again. Here I'm recording a receipt for some parking at the airport. And it's going to take a snapshot of this very quickly. Okay, there's my receipt. Looks like it got the whole thing, so I don't need to adjust any of the margins. I'm going to hit done. It's uploading, it's reading it. And again, it's going to do its best to populate my expense receipt for me automatically. Okay, so it found that I was at the Bradley International Airport. It found the date. It found the amount. And again, under my details, my default is that I used like my company card. I am going to change that to say that I personally paid for that. I needed to go ahead and assign my expenses. So I'm just going to say business travel here. Type in travel for the account because I didn't set that first. My unit of measure, you're better off picking your expense item first, otherwise you can see you do have to populate some more information or start over. All right, so here we go. I have my 2 receipts that I just loaded here. I did do some kind of practicing early on to make sure that this demo was going to be successful, so you are seeing some repeats of the same receipts, such as because I processed them prior. All right, so I'm done with my mobile app here, and I'm going to switch back over to Acumatica, where under my time and expense module, I can go ahead and here's where I can see, as well as other users that have the ability to see transactions for the employee, number 2 here in this case. So we can set up a company tree that provides some structure for those that are kind of managing employees, and it will define which receipts, which claims that you'll be able to see across the employees you're managing. So here are these 2 open receipts that I haven't done anything with. The goal or the purpose of the receipts is really to kind of get all your receipts in, have them aggregate through whatever the period is. That's going to cover your expense claim or your expense report. And then once you're ready to remit that claim or that report, you're going to go and you're going to select the receipts that you want to include into that single claim. All right, so here's my 2 open receipts that I want to go ahead and include. And I'm going to say, go create a claim for me. Okay. So this is kind of equivalent, right, to like an expense report that maybe you're using today in Excel, where people are going out and they're breaking out all the receipts into a single report. I have the ability, I can change things if I need to. I can add additional receipts if I started my claim and I found some other lingering receipts. So a lot you could still do in this screen. I'm going to just move forward and say, I'm ready to submit this claim. So I'm going to submit it. We do have a set of approvals on this expense claim, which I am able to approve. Here's where you can see this got assigned to a finance work group that I'm a member of. So I can go ahead and approve this. Once it's approved, you can release, which is finalizing it. So again, we can release a single claim, right? Or you can have a processing screen where you could release all the claims that have been approved, or even set that processing screen up on a schedule so it would release them all automatically. I'm going to go ahead and release. And when I release that claim, what it did was, if I go to my financial details, it actually created an AP bill for me. So I can drill into that AP bill. So it created an AP bill for that employee. So going back to what George was saying, this employee is not set up as a vendor, right? They're an employee, but the system still lets me record bills that I need to pay to my employee, even though they're not a vendor. And here's where you can see those individual receipts. Okay, so this is all queued up, and it is ready for me to pay when I want to do a check run. So pretty cool how you're able to utilize that mobile app, not just to be able to record through the mobile app, but the fact that it has that document recognition piece built into it, which again kind of automates a lot of the typical manual entry that a user would need to key in. All right. All right, so we're going to move on, and I'm just going to quickly show you how we can go ahead and build a payment batch. So I'm going to navigate back over to my payables module, and I'm going to go to this prepare payment screen. So this prepare payment screen is equivalent to your build batch screen in GP, where in this prepare payment screen, you're going to set some filters where you're going to define what bills you want to pay based on the payment method that's associated with those bills. Okay, so when you set up your vendor, if you recall, you can say, we pay this vendor by check and we pay it out of this account. That defaults onto the AP bill. And therefore, when I come in and I set this filter to that payment method and cash account, I'm seeing all the bills that are scheduled to be paid using this method in this cash account. Okay. Now, what we're seeing here in the grid to pay is all controlled through these different parameters up top here. So you could set a filter where maybe you're only paying a certain vendor class. I'm sure I'll pick product vendors. Yep, that worked. So based on my product vendor class, my documents to pay just refreshed to show me only the bills, right, that I have open that are ready for payment for my product vendors. You could get vendor specific as well if you wanted to. If you're using project accounting, you can pay bills just for maybe a specific project and nothing else. Okay. And then we also have some checkboxes where we're saying we want to pay bills that are scheduled with a date to pay within a certain number of days. All right. So again, cash, if you have terms where it allows you to do cash discounts, you can set some filters there again to make sure that it's pulling in all the right bills based on due date, cash discount date, so that you're paying your vendors on time. All right. So I'm just going to kind of move forward with this selection here. I'm going to hit this little checkbox here just to select them all. Now, based on what I selected up here in my header, here's where you can see some of that information starts to kind of refresh and update, where it's showing me my GL cash account balance versus maybe what's available. It shows me how many bills I selected from a number of bills perspective, as well as my total dollars that are selected. So I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to say process all. Now in GP, for most of our customers, when they're doing that build batch process, it actually takes quite a bit of time. Once you define or set those parameters and you build your batch, I mean, I've had customers have to sit there for 15, 20 minutes, depending on volume. And the volume even wasn't that great. It's just a screen in GP that tends to run very, very slow. In Acumatica, I mean, you could see as I was applying those parameters in that prepare payment screen that that grid just is dynamically refreshing immediately. It's not pausing, it's not thinking, it's immediate. Same thing even with the printing. When I said, hey, I want to process those, tick all those bills, and you saw how quickly it queued them all up here for the printing of the payment. So here's everything that was in that prepare payment screen that I said I wanted to pay. Okay, they're all selected. If I change my mind here, I certainly could unselect some, but I'm going to continue moving forward with process. You can see that the system is telling me that it's suggesting my next check number based on the check number that I left off with. The other thing to note is that the number of payments, I had 18 bills, I have 12 payments. That's because the system is rolling up multiple invoices right into a single payment to your vendor. Acumatica does have the ability at both a vendor level or even when you're keying in the bill, if you want to pay that invoice separately or the vendor as a whole separately, there is a setting for that. So it will not combine multiple invoices into a single payment. So I'm just going to go ahead, I'm going to process this, just to kind of finish this up. Here's where it's loading the screen with my checks. So from here, I could just hit my printer button and go and print my checks, okay? This is a separate window that popped up. The original window that was open was that print check screen, which automatically changed to the release payment screen, where I've got a few different actions that I can take. Everything printed fine, I can go ahead and release. Otherwise, I can reprint or reprint with a new number. So again, this is a little bit different than GP. When you do a reprint in GP, right, it doesn't ask you if you're using the same numbers. So if one got jammed, right, and you had 50 checks to print, I've seen people have to throw away all 50 of those checks because the system doesn't let you reprint with the same number. Here in Acumatica, you have an option to say, I want to print with new numbers, or if I want to reprint basically using the same number. So again, really nice functionality, helps minimize wasting of those checks that you're cutting there. So if I'm ready to release, I could go ahead and process. And this is going to finalize this check payment, release them. It's going to put the invoices, if they are paid in full, to history, as well as these payments. Okay. So that kind of finishes what I wanted to cover on the payable side, and just going through either differences between Acumatic and GP or just additional functionality that just doesn't currently exist at all. So we're going to move over to our customer side. And on the customer profiling, I'm going to kind of try and move a little bit quicker. Time is quickly getting away from us. And point out just some of, again, the key differences on a customer file. So like my vendor, I created some side panels where if I click this top one here, or even hover over, it tells me what is going to open. This is my customer profile screen. I have here a dashboard. So depending on the customer that's selected, it's giving me some information about the customer, what they ordered, do they have any open AR, what are their trends, things like that. So again, if I click on a different customer, that dashboard is going to refresh automatically, showing me information about the currently selected customer. So that's just a little, just an example on how we can pull dashboards into these side panels. And then we did the same thing, customer details. If we want to be able to quickly see what's open at a document level, we're showing this customer details side panel here. Okay, so all this we added in probably a matter of just a few minutes. We were able to add these 3 side panels that's showing us information in 3 different Acumatica screens so that I don't have to navigate off of where I'm at. It's just passing in that customer ID and just dynamically showing me this information. All right, I'm going to drill into a customer. So just like on the payable side, we have customer pop-up notes that we can add. We've got the same file upload functionality. Same thing with activities, where we can record different activities that are taking place with the customer. Want to point out a couple of different things that wasn't on the vendor side, and that is under the financial settings. If you have customers where they're sending you an AR payment and they're not paying the entire invoice, but they're paying specific items on the invoice, for that vendor, you could turn on this pay by line functionality, okay? And it's going to allow you to not just apply your payment, your customer's payment to an invoice, but it's going to allow you to apply it specifically to a certain item or a certain line on the invoice. So I know there are customers out there that pay that way, and without that functionality, when you're trying to determine what's open and communicate that with your customer, that can become just a lot more complicated than I think it needs to be. So I just wanted to point out that pay by line functionality. The other thing I want to point out here is this holds true for both the customer and vendor, but there is this change ID function. So if you needed to change your customer's ID, you can just come right up to the change ID and you could enter in the new customer ID or vendor ID if this is a vendor that you want to assign to that customer. So in GP, can you change IDs? Yes, but it's much more complicated. There's certain tools you need access to as an admin to be able to go do all that, where as long as you have access to this screen and this action, which is available by default if you have access to the screen, you can change that ID if you need to. And then it will change it throughout the system wherever that customer was used previously. Okay. Last thing I want to point out on the customer is that there are a nice list of reports that you could run right from the customer. You could quickly run an aging report where it's going to fire up an aging that's going to be specific just to this one customer. Okay. From here, you can print, or better yet, you could go ahead and you could send this to your customer. And if you have their email address on file, you would find that here in the list. You could see here's my report. Let me just save this first. Let me pull anybody for the moment just so that I can save this. Here's where you could see it's actually attaching that receivables report. Okay, so really easy to email reports from Acumatica, but I really like that from the customer screen. You've got access to reports that are automatically filtered to the customer, as well as inquiries. Okay. All right, so we are going to jump over here into the receivables, invoices, and memos. So here is my generic inquiry that's showing me all of my transactions across all my customers here in the system. I can just come up here if I don't want to do anything with that inquiry and go directly into my invoices and memos. Here's where I'm going to go, and I'm going to pick my customer. I'm going to use my U.S. bartending school customer. And here's where, like we saw on the payable screen, same thing holds true on the receivable side. I'm able to go create a detailed invoice for my customer rather than like GP, where you're just putting it in a summary dollar amount. And the only thing the customer is going to see for a description, right, would be like your description here up in the header. Okay. Now, I can put in my own transaction description if I'd like to, again, with as much information here as I want, with a quantity, unit measure, unit price. Maybe I just want to put in a total price. I could certainly do that. I could also utilize non-stock items to populate these lines. So maybe you're a service industry, you don't really have inventory, but you provide services, right, to your customers. We can set those services up as non-stock items. So I'm going to do a lookup here. You can see I've got a few different services kind of queued up for this example, where I'm able to go and I'm able to say, all right, I want to do the installation, right, of an air conditioner. Okay, so I can pull in that non-stock service. It will automatically pull in the transaction description. Here I can put in the quantity, and you'll notice here that there was a price that auto-populated. So what I did was I utilized Acumatica's price list functionality, where I was able to go ahead and say, for this item, the air conditioning installation service, our base price is $800. Okay. Now through this pricing, if I wanted to, I actually could take it a step further. I could set up some customer specific pricing, where maybe for US bartending, it was $600 instead of $800. So we have some flexibility using the Acumatica pricing module and how that controls the pricing for these different services that you may offer to your customer. Okay. That's where the pricing came from over here. I can hit another line. Maybe I provided another service that I was out there. I actually did some repairs while I was there, and those repairs took me 3 hours, and we're charging them $100 an hour. Okay. The sales revenue accounts that it's going to use, system already knows which accounts. Your users don't have to necessarily define that, although they can, or they can override it. But I have the sales account that I want to use for this service defined at the service item level. So that's where that account is coming from. All right. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to save that. So again, GP does not allow you in a receivables invoice. You need to use the sales order processing module in GP to be able to create a line level invoice. You cannot use the receivables module. That is at a header level only. So big difference and a good positive difference here in Acumatica when it comes to that. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to release that. Okay. And so now this invoice here is available for processing. Okay. Now, one thing I want to point out here, I do have US bartending set up where the default payment method is a credit card. Okay. There is some functionality in Acumatica where we could set up some automatic credit card processing for these invoices if we wanted to do so. If you have the card on file, you want to automate the processing of that, you certainly can. Otherwise, you can leave it manual, and you could go ahead and you can actually charge the card through the payment and application screen, which I'm going to kind of show you next. So I'm going to go over to receivables. I'm going to go to payments and applications. And I'm going to hit my plus button to start a new payment. And I'm going to pull up my US bartending school. Okay. It knows based on how I have this customer defined in their profile that their default payment method is this MasterCard. Okay. You don't necessarily have to have the card stored on file. You could say it's a new card, and you could actually put in the card number at the time you're processing the payment. This example here is just assuming that this customer wants us to store their card on file and wants us to use this for processing of their invoices. All right. So because I have it stored on file, it's all queued up here. All I need to do is come up here and put in the amount. So I'm going to put in $100. Okay. This is a vendor here where I do have them set up so that I can pay their invoice not just at a document level, but at a line level. So you'll notice down here in my documents to apply grid, you're seeing the same invoice number, AR93 or AR95, repeat twice. That's because this customer is showing us all of their open AR by line, right, by item. So this is line 1, this was line 2 on invoice 93. Same thing, line 1, line 2 on invoice 95. Okay, so here's where I'm just saying I'm paying $100, and now I can go select which line of that invoice that I want to apply it to. Because I have the card on file, the only thing I need to do is go ahead and capture that. So this is using an authorized.net gateway. There are several out-of-the-box gateways that are available to you. I am connected to an authorized.net test account where it actually is going through and it's processing that payment. Okay, so the payment was successful. I got my green little checkbox up here. If I go to my credit card processing info, here's where you can see some information about that credit card transaction. Right, gives you the authorization number that it writes back to, tells you if it was approved or what the status of that is. That line, that single line for that invoice 93 that I checked off that I wanted to apply to, once the payment's processed and closed, that line here goes to history. So you can find that application under the history tab. So speaking of history and receivables, in GP, right, to get your transactions to move to history, there is a paid transaction removal process that needs to be run. I know a lot of clients run that as part of their month-end process, which moves all of their paid transactions over into a history status. That process completely goes away in Acumatica, Acumatica moves things to history, whether it be the payment or the invoice, automatically once that invoice has been either paid in full, right, or if it's a payment, it's been completely applied. So no more paid transaction removal, anything like that here inside of Acumatica. The other thing that is super easy to do in Acumatica, again, not easy to do in GP, right? You got to use a tool to do that, is to do a unapply, okay? In Acumatica, if you take a payment and you want to unapply that because you applied it either to the wrong line or the wrong invoice, all you need to do is find that payment. So I'll use this one as an example that we're on. And under the application tab where you're seeing what it was applied to, if you just say reverse application, okay, it's going to go ahead, reverse application. Actually, it already reversed it. It was that quick. And I just need to say release. Okay. So now that payment, that $100 payment that I made with a credit card, the status isn't closed anymore. And that's because it's not applied to anything currently, right? So it's open. And what you find under that payment is not only did it reverse it, right, but it actually keeps a history of the fact that it unreversed it. So you got a full audit trail of what's happened in the past as far as your applications go. Okay. So now if I wanted to take this open payment that's already processed, already released, and apply it to something, I can come to my Documents tab, and here's where I can take a peek at all my invoice numbers, right, that are open. And I could certainly come in and I can apply it again to a specific line if I'm paying by line, otherwise a specific invoice. So I'm just reapplying it to the same thing here, and I go ahead and I release that apply. So again, no tools, no need for administrative access to have to handle the reversal of any of your applications. It's all done here right within the originating payment screen. And if you have access to the screen, by default, you'll have access to these functions unless we want to revoke security. But by default, you have security to that with the screen. Okay. So again, it's just a lot more efficient here, right? In Acumatica, when it comes to the, not needing the paid transaction removal to the reversal just being at your fingertips instead of having that be more of an admin process. Okay. I do want to quickly go back to our invoices and memos. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put in another invoice really quick. I'm going to use ABC Holdings, okay, where I'm going to go put in I'm not going to use an inventory item, just going to put in a dollar amount, and I'll just call this services rendered. Okay. So in Acumatica, if you want to email the invoice, as long as you have an email address on file, I'm going to go down to addresses. You can see the email address we have on file for this customer. This is info@ABC Holdings. I just want to email it out using the default notification template, which is where I have the body of what I want in my email defined. I can just simply come up and say email. It is that simple. The system will go ahead and email that. You'll notice here under activities, I have an activity that was added. This is, again, kind of showing me the fact that I sent out this email, so I have a nice audit trail of that. I can open that up, and here's where I can see who it was emailed to, who the sender was, which I just have the company set up as the sender here, the body of the email, and then the actual invoice attachment, all right there at your fingertips. If you need to refer back to that in the future. Now, if you're processing a lot of invoices all at once, there are some processing screens where we can send all your emails out in mass automatically through processing screens. This is just a flavor of how you could go ahead and just through the click of that email, you could send out that email really quickly for this invoice. Okay. That's a little bit on the emailing. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pay this invoice. So I'm going to go back over to my payments and applications screen. We're going to talk a little bit about write-offs. payments, down here, receivables and applications. So my customer is ABC Holding. So I'm going to start typing. I'll just type in holding just to show you how the searching works, right? So it finds all the companies that contain that word. I'll select ABC Holding. And let's say I am going to pay $499.99. Here's the one that I just did. Okay. So what I kind of wanted to illustrate to you is this write-off function. So that invoice was $500 that I created to ABC Holdings. I'm working under the assumption we got a payment for $499.99. Acumatica does allow you to go ahead and right from your payment and application screen, you can write off that balance. Right? It uses this default reason code, which controls the accounting, so it knows which account to go ahead and book that write-off to. Now, the amount that you can write off, if I drill into my customer, is controlled through this enable write-off checkbox and then the limit that I put in here. So I have the ability to write off up to $10 for this customer is what this is saying. So it's saved. Let me release. There it is. We have our payment now that has been applied, right, to this invoice. So what happens here if I go back to my invoice and memos, okay, you're going to see this payment, right? It is closed, okay, because it's been fully written off with that penny there, okay? So again, that's how you can kind of quickly do a write-off. Just come over here. Here's our payment with our write-off. You can do that in one big swoop when you're doing the payment application. Acumatica also has a write-off balances and credit screen where if you want to write off some balances, here's where you could specify a limit and you could do write-offs in this screen for a specific customer or across all your receivables, right? All at once, right through this processing screen as well. So you have two options for write-off. Okay. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about finance charges. Inside of Acumatica, they do call it overdue charges. Just going to take you into the overdue charge screen where we have one set up just so you can get a feel for some of the options here. So you can have multiple overdue charge IDs where maybe you're charging certain customers either different percentages, or maybe you might have kind of like a handling fee that you associate with all these overdue invoices as well, because you need to take some action on those, so you're charging a fee with that. That can vary from one customer to the next through having multiple overdue charge IDs, right? So when you set up your overdue charge, you have some flexibility on how the system's going to calculate the overdue charge. It could calculate it on the current balance. It can do a prorated balance. So maybe the invoice is already paid by the time the end of the month comes around, but it was still paid 10 days late, right? The system can actually do some prorating and charge some overdue charges on the number of days that it was late during that month, even though it's currently paid. Or you can do interest on arrears where you're just assessing those overdue charges at the time the invoice is closed or paid, right? So this one is calculated on interest on balance. This is going to be the term that the system's going to use when it creates that overdue charge document, the GL accounts that you want it to hit when it creates that document, and then what are the charges. So you can apply some flat fees if you want to. Your flat fees can go to a different account than the actual finance charge. And then you have some options as far as how much do you want to charge them? Okay, are there any thresholds? Are there minimum amounts? Is it a fixed amount? Is it a percentage? You've got a lot of flexibility here so that, again, maybe the finance charge was a small balance. The charge was only going to come up to maybe $1. In this case, we're saying you have to charge them at least $5. That is our minimum finance charge. And then we're defining rates and then the effective dates for those rates. So again, a lot more flexibility here in how you can set up how the system is going to calculate those charges, what rates or what flat dollar amounts it's going to use. Once that's been defined, there is a setting on the customer, right, that you will indicate whether or not overdue charges or finance charges are even applicable to that particular customer. All right. If they are, there is an overdue charge screen. So under your calculate overdue charges, you pick the statement cycle that that customer is associated with, hit your calculate button. Okay, and then this is going to give you a list of all the customers where it's saying an overdue charge should be applied. Right. From here, you can just go ahead and process. You'll notice before I hit process that there are 3 invoices here where it didn't automatically select those. If I hover over my little green check, it didn't select them because it's finding that there are some payments out there that either aren't applied to the invoices or there's payments with an unreleased status. So I didn't finalize the payments yet. So this is kind of like a warning of, hey, before we calculate charges, you probably want to go look at these accounts to see if you should either apply the payment or release the payment, because that may affect, right, the overdue charge that the system is now going to calculate. Right. So I'm gonna just skip over those 3 and I'm gonna say process all. It processed them. So what does that mean? That means now when I go to my receivables, invoices, and memos, I should see overdue charges for each of those customers and those invoices that were late. So you can see it automatically created that overdue charge document for me in this balance status so that I could go ahead and review this. So I'm just going to open up one so you can see what this looks like. Okay. So in here, the type, right, it's not an invoice, it's an overdue charge, which is nice because now when you're looking at this or you're printing statements, it's actually a different document type, which is easy for the user to identify as well as the customer to identify. And then down in the details, it actually breaks out the overdue charge per invoice. So if there were multiple invoices where you were assessing those charges on, you would see a line for every invoice and the applicable overdue charge for that invoice. So a lot of companies, when they create these overdue charges, not only do they show it on their statements, but you could print this invoice or email this invoice to your customer so they actually get this overdue charge document. Okay. So that's a little bit on overdue charges. Again, a lot more powerful than what is available in GP. I'm going to go ahead and release those so we can move on with our statements. All right. So last topic that I want to walk through with you is statement processing here in Acumatica. And I'm going to start by going into my customer. So we can set up different statement cycles in Acumatica. The statement cycles can control the frequency that a statement gets sent out on. Also, what is the typical overdue charge that gets applied to a customer of that statement type? And that statement cycle gets applied here to the customer, and then when we run statements for that cycle, this particular customer would get picked up in that. All right. So in addition to being able to run statements kind of en masse through a processing screen, system also does allow you to generate a statement on demand for your customer. So under this action menu is where I want to start. I'm going to hit generate statement on demand. And here's where you can say what date you want to generate that statement through. I'm just going to say, I want a current statement. My customer's calling me and they're saying, I want to see a current statement, everything that's open. So I just generated a statement through today so that now when I come to reports and I print my customer statement, it's going to show me everything through today here for my customer, where you can see they have a payment, right? And then they have a few invoices that are open. From here, I could print, right? Or I could go ahead and I can send, which is going to email this statement off to my customer. So that's how you can generate an on-demand statement and control what your end date is going to be for that statement when you're generating that on demand. So I think that's pretty nice here at a customer level. Okay. Now, if you're running statements, under this scenario, we got an end of a month, there is a statement processing screen. Okay. So you would come to your processing screen, you would run this prepare statements for that cycle. There are some additional settings in the statements where if you require overdue charges to be run first, the system's smart enough to make sure that you ran your overdue charges, otherwise it's not going to let you process. So here's where you can see my next statement date is going to be for the 30th. So I'm just going to go ahead and process that. So it's going through, it's looking at all my customers that have that end of month statement cycle, and it's going through and it's preparing that statement now with that date of 9/30. Once it's prepared, I can go into my print statement screen, pick my statement cycle, okay? And then this is going to show me all of my statements that are queued up. Now, you'll notice that it was blank. Okay, the reason why it was blank is because of this action. If I hit show all, I can see that all of my customers are set up to not actually print. Again, this is a setting on the customer. We don't actually print. So if you had a combination of customers where some wanted a printed statement, some wanted an emailed statement, here's where we can go ahead and we can print, right? We could email if they needed to be emailed, so that it separates it out. Again, just the way this environment's set up, it's set up to don't print or don't email. So to see them, I need to do that show all. But again, you would take your action based on how you have it set for your customer. You would hit process. That would either print if that was your action, or it would automatically email out that statement to your customer. Now, the statement type or the format of the report that it's going to print, there's some flexibility there as well. We have run into a lot of customers where there are multiple reporting formats of statements, and it depends on the kind of customer. Over on the customer screen, if you needed to have multiple statement formats for the customer under their mailing settings, okay, here's where you could actually control for our statements. This one happens to have two. You can control which report is actually going to get sent out to a particular customer. So just want to point that out. I know sometimes that can be challenging in GP. Really easy here in Acumatica if you need to have multiple statement reports to be able to define one to your customer. Okay. So that was the last topic under receivables that I wanted to kind of go through. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to George, and then maybe we'll have some time for some Q&A. So thank you.
So, Stacey, first of all, thank you very much for doing a wonderful job of showing the accounts payable and the accounts receivable areas of Acumatica, and doing a really great job of comparing the differences between GP and Acumatica. Any questions from anybody who is on the call here?
Desiree is interested to see inventory, as they have many items using inventory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we could do just a out of the box, kind of personal session on that. Certainly open it up to other people if it was something of interest. Just reach out to Amy. And we could, include you on that session if it makes sense. Everybody have a great afternoon and the rest of the week. And anybody who needs any more information or pricing or whatever, if they want to do a deeper dive, we're available here to answer those questions or get you that information. Have a great day, and look forward to you on our next Cal Lunch and Learn, and we'll close that out. Have a great day.